So today, Jesus is telling us perhaps his most confusing parable. Now, it's confusing to us. It wasn't confusing to his listeners. It seems as if Jesus is praising a crooked business manager for being deceitful. So let's, first of all, understand what's happening in this parable, and then in it, discover what Jesus wants to do in us right here and now. So the steward is going to get fired because he was squandering the property of his master. And so he called in those who owed his master money and started reducing their debts considerably. Now, at first glance, it seems like he's stealing from his boss. But notice that his boss doesn't reprimand him for that. In fact, the boss doesn't think he is. Because in the ancient world, the steward would be paid by tacking on a charge from what is owed the master. So if someone borrowed 50 barrels of oil, then he would have to pay that 50 barrels of oil to the master, and then the steward would tack on 10, 30, 50 for himself. So when the steward reduced the 100 containers of wheat to 80, he was doing something that wasn't harming the master. Rather, what the steward was doing is that he is basically sacrificing his commission. So that's what's going on in the parable. And the master praises him for that. So in the face of the decision to either save his life or to try to squeeze out every last bit of profit that he could from his master, he decides to use whatever he has to save his life. His master, and Jesus through the master, calls this prudent and wise. So now that we get a better sense of what's happening in the parable, we put on the biblical mind, what does Jesus want to do in us right here and now with this parable? Well, I think there's a number of lessons here, but let me offer you two fundamental lessons to take into your own life from this parable. The first lesson is this: realize that in some way, each of us is that dishonest steward. Let me explain. Think about it. God has given us tremendous gifts. He created the world good, the whole universe. He gave us our lives. He gave us our talents and our material blessings. Everything we have, fundamentally, including ourselves, is a loving, good gift from the loving, good God. Our relationships and our money, jobs, and with these gifts, we've profited. We've made a commission. But here's the question: whom have these profits benefited? The master or ourselves? Right? None of these gifts were meant strictly for ourselves and only for our profit, but rather for being a co-worker with him to build his kingdom. You know, the Lord loves us and he made the world good. But in this recognition basically is to recognize our fallen nature. Right? That we are created good, but that we, through sin, have become captive under the tyranny of sin. And that has made us selfish. So we tend to use, without God's help, left to ourselves, we tend to use his gifts for ourselves, for our own selfish aims, and not using it in the way they were intended. So Jesus wants us to kind of realize our situation, that we are captive until he rescues us from that tyranny of selfishness. And now the time is now to act wisely and to invest wisely. Now, what can we learn from the steward's example when his master confronts him on his selfishness? Well, the steward starts doing some very wise investing. to use the profit that we have tried to gain selfishly and give it to the Lord, building his kingdom so that he would take care of us in return. I mean, there's an implication here. One is if we don't want to do the right thing simply because it's the right thing to do, then at least we should do the right thing because it's in our best interest. And like that steward, we're faced with the choice of trying to cling to the profits for ourselves or saving our lives. Because in the end, we do give an account to God of our stewardship. Like we can't take money or possessions with us when we go. And if we use whatever the Lord has given us in this world for him and to take care of others, especially the poor, at our judgment, they will be the ones in heaven who will be our advocate during the reckoning of our life and welcoming us into the eternal dwelling of heaven. I tell you, make friends for yourselves with dishonest wealth so that when it fails, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Because Jesus has told us in Matthew 25 that whatever we did for the least of his brothers and sisters, we did for him. And so in this first lesson there, in the realization of our situation, is we have a choice. Jesus himself says we cannot serve both God and mammon. And this is part of the indictment that Amos is giving to the chosen people in that first reading. The chosen people were chosen by God to be his own people and to live differently than those who are living a worldly life. We are to live differently from the world. And so what does the prophet do here in the first reading? He's reminding Israel, is like, you're acting like everybody else. Right? You have a call. Right? And what is Israel falling into? We're all about the money, even so far as cheating and oppressing those who are poor. And Amos is saying, no, you are to be different. This is all, you are to live as my people. And this kind of takes us to the second lesson, that Jesus invites us to have that shrewd attitude of the steward. Our Lord says that the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the children of light. In other words, that people who are worldly are oftentimes more prudent than believers when it comes to making choices that concern their survival. Right? Think about business. Right? If a businessman knows that a certain business practice is losing him money, what does he do? He tries to fix it. If he can't fix it, he eliminates it. Why? For the survival of the company. Right? If we just let the losses keep going and let them build and build and build, that business is going to fail. What about us, Christians? When we know that there's something in our lives that's losing us God's grace, right? Which is the most precious, the greatest treasure that we could have is his grace, which is the giving us of his own life. And that happens through sin. Right? In sin, we're squandering that treasure. We're throwing it away. We're throwing it back in his face. We don't always act in that decisive and intelligent way that the worldly person does with his or her business. And this is because we're often blind to the greatness of divine grace. We don't see it for what it is because of our perception. Or we can also either allow our enemy to deceive us that this sin isn't really what it is, it's not really that bad, or losing us God's grace. Or perhaps we've been struggling with it for so long that the enemy discourages us, thinking like, well, I'm just never going to be able to get rid of that. Now, both of those are lies. Those are lies from the father of lies. Because divine grace can and does change us. And when we have that attitude of the steward, to be kind of decisive and intelligent about it, to engage the Lord with his grace, then grace begins to do what grace does. It begins to eliminate sin and to heal us and to set us on fire with divine love. So today, Jesus in this parable is telling us to be smart about our salvation. Because in the final analysis, salvation is all that matters. St. Paul tells St. Timothy and us, the Lord desires all to be saved. Right? One look at the cross tells us that, and how much he loves us, how far he's willing to go for us. He wants to save us. But he who created us without our help will not save us without our cooperation, because his life and the life of heaven is all about love. And love means that we must freely choose to love. So he suggests to us to use the goods that he has given us, the blessings, our own lives, everything we have, to use it to do good with, for the building of his kingdom, for helping those in need. And second, to be shrewd about what is losing us grace, to engage with the Lord so that we can walk that path of divine love. So where is your heart stirred by this parable? Pay attention to that. That's the Lord speaking to your heart. He wants us to use our minds to orient everything we do towards him. The time is now. And so let us live as a shrewd child of the light.